Hey nature photographers, it's Lee Hoy, and as you may know, I am an OM system ambassador and I love talking all things OM system. Whether it's the OM-1 Mark II with the trusty 150 to 400, whether I'm talking about the OM-1 with the 40 to 150, whether we're talking about computational photography features, but today I'm going to talk to you about my favorite drive mode. That's right, SH2. Hands down my favorite drive mode for wildlife photography. Up to 50 frames per second, leaps tall buildings in a single bound, attracts the hottest chicks or men or whatever you're into. I don't care. But let's get to talking about it. Howdy from West Texas. I'm Lee Hoy, professional nature photographer, and this is my YouTube channel, Lee Hoy Photography. I'm an OM system ambassador, photography workshop instructor for Wildside Nature Tours of Precision Camera and Video, and contributing author for the Journal of Wildlife Photography. So before we start talking about SH2 drive mode, I want to let you in on a little exciting fact. On Sunday, June 30th at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, I will host my first ever YouTube Live. For about an hour and a half, I will be open to talking all things nature photography and OM system camera and gear, anything related to that, computational photography. I look forward to it, so plan on joining me on Sunday, June 30th. All right, SH2 drive mode. I loved using it on the OM-1 and the OM-1 Mark II. I love shooting at up to 50 frames per second. Did you notice that little phrase, at up to? There are factors that can affect our overall frames per second, regardless of what drive mode we're in. We're going to take a look at some of the caveats, some of the footnotes that you probably didn't read in the manual, because I know manuals aren't that exciting to read. So let's jump right on into SH2 drive mode. Now, why is it my favorite for wildlife? In a little bit, I'm going to show you some of the images that you can capture using this drive mode. But let's talk about some of the facts, some of the standard features that come related to it. When we're using continuous autofocus with manual focus, continuous autofocus with tracking, or continuous autofocus with tracking with manual focus, if you have one of those selected, the camera will focus before each shot. This is the main reason that my favorite mode is SH2 and not SH1. Yes, SH1 can do up to 120 frames per second, but it is limited to locking focus once you press the shutter button. And for wildlife photography, I want focus to engage constantly. So that and that alone makes this, because it's up to 50 frames per second and will continuously autofocus between each image, hands down my go-to drive mode. Now, when we have metering during sequential, we're going to look at the menus here in a little bit, but in the menu item, metering during sequential, if we have that set to yes on the OM-1 and the OM-1 Mark II, the camera will meter brightness and determine the exposure before each shot. So if you're shooting in something other than manual, or even if you're shooting in manual, you should have the live highlight alerts turned on. You're going to want this set to yes. And as we hop into our sequential shooting modes later, we're going to find out some of the different settings that we want to put in place to maximize our opportunity to capture visually compelling images using 50 frames per second. One of the big caveats, in SH2, silent SH2 if you want to be technical, with the OM-1 and the OM-1 Mark II, is that it displays the shot immediately preceding the current frame. So in order to be able to record the images, keep autofocus going, constant metering, when you're looking through the viewfinder, you are seeing the image right before the current one. So that's really not going to cause you a lot of problems as you're going through. Normally when we're shooting at 50 frames per second, we see a lot of action. If you stop, in other words, you're stopping a hair bit later than what you're actually seeing. No big problem. It's not going to hurt you when it comes to that. Well, another caveat is that SH2 drive mode is only available with select lenses, Those are going to be the M-Zuko 12 to 40 f2.8, both version 1 and version 2. They are both compatible. It's also going to include the M-Zuko 12 to 100 f4.0 Pro lens. It's going to include the 40 to 150 f2.8 this is like a perfect safari lens for closer, large mammals. I mean, outstanding. It's going to include the 150 to 400, the 4.5, or AKA the Beast. Love this lens. And then it's also going to include the Mzuko 300 4.0 IS Pro. So those lenses and those lenses alone are compatible with this drive mode. I have all of them, but version 2 on the 12 to 40. May end up picking one of those up for video, and I think that it's worth it. I mean, I love all of those lenses. They all have a different role to play, and they're all capable of up to 50 frames per second. Now, to be honest, on the 12 to 40, not something I'm probably going to use at that focal range. 12 to 100, maybe doing wide angle with, say, wildlife in the Galapagos or on safari. I could see that being a potential use at 50 frames per second with those lenses. Now, the key being, when we go into our settings, on the OM-1, you have a couple of options. You can set it to 50 frames per second or 25 frames per second, and that is without blackout. That means your viewfinder does not go black on you at this frame rate. On the OM-1 Mark II, we have a couple of different options, a little more than we have in the OM-1. 50 frames per second, 25 frames per second, 16.7 frames per second, or 12.5. Now, to pick SH2 and go down to like 12.5, I'm not sure why you would want to do that instead of just using, regular high-speed sequential. But, there might be some reason to go into that. But for me, I'm generally leaving that at 50 frames per second. So that also affects a couple of other things, okay? When you're in SH2 drive mode, the lower limits on the shutter speed are different for the OM-1 and the OM-1 Mark II. So on the OM-1, if you have it set to 50 frames per second, the slowest shutter speed you can shoot is 1/640th of a second. If you have it set to 25 frames per second, the lowest shutter speed is 1/320th of a second. On the OM-1 Mark II, at 50 frames per second, our slowest shutter speed is 1/640th of a second. But if we have it at 25, 16.7, or 12.5, then our lowest shutter speed is 1/160th of a second. Now, I realize that's a limitation, but if you think about it, if we're shooting at 50 frames per second, that probably means we have some serious action or bird in flight, right? Maybe a predator hunting, an insect jumping, a bird taking off. And most of the time, a shutter speed below those numbers is probably not going to cut it. Now, I realize you might say, well, what if I wanted a little blur? Well, you probably don't need to do 50 frames per second for that, right? So if you want to get to a shutter speed below those stated, that means you will have to change your drive mode. Another limitation with both the OM-1 and the OM-1 Mark II in SH2 drive mode is that you cannot use an ISO above 12.8. So if I need to be at an ISO above 12,800, then I drop down to just silent sequential, which is 20 frames per second. So still a lot of frames. And honestly, if you start getting those higher ISOs, your autofocus accuracy can drop a little bit. So no problem. We want to go to a lower frame rate, help increase our autofocus accuracy. Okay. Now, the maximum number of frames we can take in SH2 is 96. As you watch in the corner of your screen, you will see that number change as you're holding the shutter button down. And in just a little bit, we're going to hop into the cameras and take a look at them, and you'll be able to see that visually. Our raw buffer will handle up to 213 images. So as you can see, that's a lot of images. I really never have an issue with that being a problem. Well, now that I've covered some of the caveats related to shooting at 50 frames per second, let's take a moment, hop into the menus on both the OM-1 and the OM-1 Mark II, and take a look at some of the settings related to SH2 drive mode. Well, let's hop right into the OM-1. You can see here I've got the viewfinder available, and I wanted to show you, look at my cursor with the little yellow circle. Here on the right-hand side of the viewfinder, it lets us know that we're in silent sequential SH2. So that's the little icon in the viewfinder that lets you know what drive mode you're currently shooting in. Now there are 3 different places in the menu where we can adjust settings related to SH2 drive mode. So let's hop into the menu on the OM-1 and we'll take a look at the OM-1 Mark II in a moment. So I am in camera menu 1, page 7, the drive mode, okay? And there are 3 elements here that relate. Number 1, which drive mode are we going to shoot in? And you can see, if I go in there, I have SH2 selected, highlighted. If you have a lens attached to the OM-1 that is not compatible with that drive mode, it won't be available as an option. It will be grayed out. So the next menu item we need to consider are our sequential shooting settings. Now, if you have SH2 unchecked, if you go back up here to the drive mode, you will see that SH2 is not an option. So if you don't see it in your drive mode option, we need to go into sequential shooting settings, and we need to make sure there's a checkbox in front of SH2. Only those drive modes that have a check in front of them will be available for selection. Now you'll notice in the menu item here, okay, whenever you see an arrow like this, it means we can press the directional pad right or the joystick and enter deeper into that menu item. So here we have 2 options. What is our maximum frames per second? And do we wish to apply a frame count limiter? So on the first one, we can set SH2 to either 50 or 25 frames per second. I'm looking for more options for images of wildlife action, birds in flight. I always leave it set to 50. And that means, again, my minimum shutter speed on the OM-1 will be 1/640th of a second in this drive mode. That's not a problem for me. If you wish to set a frame count limiter, you could set it at 50. And that would just be that you're going to take no more than 50 images whenever you press the shutter button. I don't know what circumstance I might want to apply that, but I never will. So I'm going to leave that off. Those are the only settings that we need to address for SH2 in sequential shooting settings. Next, we're going to want to go down to the silent settings. We're going to press OK. We need to make sure each of these are set correctly to get the most out of SH2 with our OM-1. First, for wildlife photography, we do not want to have any waiting time. That is in essence a delay from when we press the shutter button until it takes the first image. For wildlife photography, that's a no-no. Don't do it. Leave it at 0 seconds. I could see if you're using a silent a silent drive mode, not SH2, you wouldn't do that with this, but say you're doing landscape and you're using a slower shutter speed and you want a little bit of a delay from when you press the shutter so you don't introduce some vibration or movement to the image, then that might make sense. Noise reduction is not going to be on for this drive mode. It won't even be an option, okay? Then you don't want to have the autofocus beep available for wildlife photography. You don't want it spooking subjects or pissing off other photographers primarily. Autofocus illuminator, if you want that help in autofocus, make sure that's turned on. And if you're going to use flash, there are a lot of limitations when using flash with silent drive modes. So we may do a video in the future talking about that, but there are some serious limitations to using flash. So for SH2, I'm not even going to allow it. All right, so let's go back out to our main menu by pressing the menu button. We've now considered all 3 menu items that we need to address for SH2 on the OM-1. So let's hop on over to the OM Mark II and take a look at that menu. All right, we're now in the OM-1 Mark II. We're looking initially here at the viewfinder, and again, find my cursor there with the yellow circle, and you'll see silent sequential SH2 in the exact same location as the OM-1. Now we want to jump into our menu, okay? And we're going to look at the first menu item under Camera Menu 1, again, right up here, Camera Menu 1, Page 7, Drive Mode. So these are identical to the OM-1, all right? But I want to walk you through it anyways, just because I know many have a question or would be concerned, is there any difference? Same thing. If you go into the drive mode, that first menu item, and you don't see SH2 as an option, That means you don't have it selected as an option under sequential shooting settings. So let's go in there and we see SH2, again, just like on the OM-1, 50 frames per second. But unlike the OM-1, we now have more choices on our maximum frames per second. We have 50, 25, 16.7, or 12.5, okay? I am going to stick with 50, and just like on the OM-1, I do not want to have any frame count limiter, so I'm going to leave that set to off. All right, and we're going to hit the menu item to go back to silent settings here at the bottom. Again, waiting time set to 0, noise reduction not available. We don't want the beep for wildlife photography. I want to allow the autofocus illuminator, and again, I'm not going to worry about flash mode right here. Now what I do is when I program my custom mode, C1 is for wildlife photography, on all of the camera bodies that have a grip, okay? If they have a battery grip, one of the main purposes of that body is for wildlife photography. Therefore, I find that I'm going to program C1 to be specifically for wildlife photography. So when I turn on my camera, both the OM-1 or the OM-1 Mark II, my default settings using SH2 are 1/1600th of a second, which I know I've told you before in other videos that most people should be above that for wildlife. So if you're older or you're frail or you're not as strong, you might want to live at 2500th of a second. I often go up from here. I start when I turn on my camera at 4.5. If I turn on, it actually will default to 5.6 if I turned on the built-in teleconverter on the 150 to 400. And my ISO, which you can't see, it's hidden behind the inset, is 1600. So that's what my settings are when I first turn on my camera in custom mode 1. I sure hope this discussion on SH2 drive mode has been beneficial. But what I want to do, I just want to show you a few quick images and why I shoot in SH2, because it all boils down to fractions of a second and options. All right, well, let's take a look at a few of the images taken with SH2, and you can see why I like 50 frames per second. Here we had a fox hunting in Yellowstone National Park in January, and you can time when they're going to jump, but I will tell you, at 50 frames per second, I had about 6 or 7 shots with every jump, allowing me to pick my favorite pose. At 20 frames per second, I might have had 2 or 3, or missed it altogether occasionally. So 50 frames per second, I ended up with this shot, which I really love. I like the feet, the head facing down. Again, a black oyster catcher jumping off a rock onto some mussels to grab some mussel to feed its chick. Well, when they jump, you're only going to get a few frames of that happening because they're not in the air very long. Here I managed to get the wings up, the nice green in the foreground, but again, it's all about, sometimes what happens is so fast, at 50 frames per second, I'm still only capturing a couple of frames of the action, and I've got choices then to pick my favorite. Here, a coot running along the surface of the water. Now, coots are going to, when they run, they tend to run a ways, and you get more opportunities. But again, at 50 frames per second, I have more choices. I like the leg position. They're separate. The one forward, the one completely back, the splashing of the water, the wing position, the head position. Again, for me, it's all about choices. Here, that Andean condor, well, it decided to shake out its feathers, and at 50 frames per second, I had quite a few to choose from. I like this one where the back wing is up, the front wing is a little lower. You got primaries bending at neat angles, and a pleasant head angle as well. Again, some of those are going to look awkward. The forewing might have been up higher than the rear wing, making an awkward look. I just want those choices. Spectacled duck in Patagonia, as it's bathing, well, at 50 frames per second, I'm going to get all kinds of positions to choose from. And I like this head angle where you can see the white patch at the front, the splashing, nice depth of field. Again, options. During the wolf hunt in Yellowstone, this, as the dominant or the alpha male came running down the hill, all these other younger males were following him, and he grimaced, and at 50 frames per second, I had 1, maybe 2 frames where you could see the teeth. and on this one, they were bared the most. This is the name of this caracara from Patagonia is escaping me right now. But again, as it's flying towards me, most of the time the tail is flat, not producing a nice image. Here, the tail feathers are down, giving nice backlit look, beautiful glow, nice detail in the tail feathers. Snowy sheathbill in Patagonia, they don't fly long, they don't fly much. And here at 50 frames per second, I got a nice background with the mountains, nice wing position, love the light, nice soft subtle light. Here's a Magellanic woodpecker, female, and at 50 frames per second, I had one frame where the grub was just barely being pulled out of the hole, this frame where you can see most of the grub, and then the next one, it had basically swallowed it. So at 50 frames per second, I only had a couple of options. Here, a jumping coyote. I managed to grab it at the peak of its jump with its head forward, great leg and tail position. 50 frames per second. The images prior to this, the bird was not near the Inca tern. The image after this, the bird was overlapping the Inca terns in the background. One frame. Fortunately, wing position's beautiful, head position, foot position. One of my favorite images from the Amazon trip. When you just swing up quick to try to grab a bird in flight, here's a greater awning, and down in the Amazon in Peru, and I managed to get it as it leapt into flight. Nice wing position, head position, but at 50 frames per second, when they jump a short distance, you're not going to get a lot of frames. A banking jacana down there, wattled jacana in Peru as well. When I pick them up quickly as they take off, they don't tend to stay in the air long. Give me frames, give me options. This is a unique wing position, leg position, head position, and at least I have some trees in the background. If this were all sky, you wouldn't be seeing this image. Here is a young Inca tern coming in, landing amongst some other Inca terns. The image prior, at 50 frames per second, it was too far away from the young terns. They were clipped more, it wouldn't look good. The image after, it's overlapping the young terns. Here, the visual balance works great. A limpkin in Florida flew rapidly across the front of our boat. At 50 frames per second, I captured about 8 frames before it disappeared in front of other photographers, and I had a few that had a really nice wing position, including this one. Here, this wolf crossing the river with the tongue out. I got lucky. Paw up, tongue out. Here is a American dipper kicking snow. Again, 50 frames per second, fast shutter speed to stop that. But here it's kicking snow up as it's walking along the water's edge. A snail kite with an apple snail. You see the snail is ejecting some water, and I want options on wing position, water droplets, background. All of those things come into play. How about an osprey during my OM system only mastering bird and flight photography workshop? Feet out, wings back, beautiful pose. After this, it's landing. Before this, it's too far back in the frame, and it'd be an awkward crop. Here, great. The male, the female, we got coming in to land. The tail feathers look great. The feet look great. Wings are in a great position. This condor was soaring. So 50 frames per second might seem like overkill to some, but they turned their head. They'd look over at us, look back out, and I want to get a nice head angle. So did I mind having a lot of images to go through? Absolutely not, because I was shooting very tight. This is not crop. I was waiting for the birds to get in front of these beautiful fall foliage trees in Patagonia. When they got there, I wanted to shoot quick because they soared along. They soon left those beautiful colored trees in the background. Another running coot during my Mastering Bird and Flight Photography workshop in Florida. Really unique light, great silhouette. Look at the wing, the leg position. 50 frames per second, I had a lot to choose from. Osprey bringing in nesting material. Nice wing position. Would like a little better head angle, but it's okay. But look at that beautiful moss it's carrying. Again, when you shoot tight, you often clip things. Here, this was one frame in the middle of a sequence where I had everything in the frame. And I got a good head angle, nice wing position, nice background. Again, I shoot tight. I could have shoot wider and crop, but that's not how I tend to shoot. Again, all about wing positioning. This tricolored heron was hunting, and I want to capture a really nice wing position, head position. So there you see some of the reasons why I like 50 frames per second. Yes, I often have a lot of images to cull. No, I don't mind doing it because of photo mechanics software. This is what I do for a living. I'm looking to capture visually compelling images. I'm all about speed. Good seeing you this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave some comments down below about what drive mode you like to use, or if you have questions that I didn't cover related to this drive mode, hop down there, give me a shout. I'm going to be off in the Galapagos Islands when you see this, but when I return, I'll be sure and get back to those comments. Y'all have a great day. Remember, get out, go get some great shots.